Hey there everyone, and welcome into this video. And without wasting too much time, ultimately I just want to talk to you about some configurations that worked for me and a few other servers that I'm an administrator in when it comes to containing the common acts of raiding or even spamming for that matter. And this involves the use of the YAGPDB bot and its moderation tools that are available. So a few benefits of this configuration. One, it can provide 24-hour monitoring and swift action to common acts of raiding. It can catch multiple users promptly and restricts their access to the server channels. And it may ultimately discourage parties from considering raiding and or spamming. And there are a few cautions because if we were in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to talk about the imperfections, but there are imperfections. So one, when you prepare to even start on this, it's a good idea, in my opinion, to inform your server members that you will be implementing an anti-raiding configuration, to which you can share with them once you've got all of the planning figured out of what you want to do, to inform them to avoid certain things that may trigger the anti-raiding rule set of the bot. And it is recommended that you do not disclose all of the information surrounding it, but just give a general idea. And also the configurations might need to be adjusted. So one thing you can do is study the common behavioral patterns of how your members are using your server, and then try to construct the rule sets around that. And the configurations might not catch all raiding behaviors. So it's important that we continue to learn the common behaviors of raiding and experiment with the bot functions to try to counteract them. But the idea of this is to try to get a somewhat of a 24-hour solution, so that way the moderation staff on your server don't necessarily get burned out. And there are some requisites before you get started with this. So one, you're going to need the YAGPDB bot in your server. It needs to have administrator permissions, and the moderation mute function needs to be set up. And also you need to create a general access role. So this is a role that for all of the general channels that are on your server, that the users will be able to use this. And you'll need to set up something that kind of automatically gives them that role. And upon doing that, the everyone role needs to be disabled from all general server access channels. So that way, when the bot mutes the user in question of raiding, they will no longer have access to those particular channels. So one solution that I recommend is definitely setting up a rules acknowledgement procedure. There's a link in the description of a video about that. And there's also a video that will help in getting the basic moderation functions set up as well. So I encourage that you check those out. And there's also one about the ticket system, which I definitely recommend as well. If you want your server staff to not have to have their the DMs open all the time, then I highly recommend implementing a ticket system. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So over here, we're just going to check the roles right quick. So in one of them, the roles, of course, is general access, to which currently it's set to view channels, but there are actually custom permissions that are set up within the categories and the channels themselves. But one thing for certain is the everyone role is absolutely disabled. You want to make sure that that's absolutely disabled, but it doesn't hurt also to do that in the categories and in the channels. One thing I recommend is in your categories, if all the channels, the rules are pretty much the same and the permissions are the same, it's a good idea to synchronize those channels with that category, which would be up here. So that way you're able to do it in one big swoop within the category rather than having to do it channel by channel. So if you have other channels to where there are certain other permissions or certain other roles for those permissions, it would be recommended that you actually move those channels to a separate category in that regard, so it's much easier to do things. So now that we have our roles set up, we're going to have to program some things in the bot. And just before we get into that, so the way the permissions are set up here, there are a few channels to where even though the user is going to be locked out for misconduct, there are a few channels they will still be able to see. One of them is they will still be able to see the rules channel, and they will also be able to see the get a ticket channel. And there's not too much need to worry about the entrance channel as long as no one is allowed to post anything. But with that, we're going to move forward. So we're going to go to our YAGPDB bot for short, and we're going to go to moderation, and then we'll go to the mute. And ultimately what we want to do is, if this is already set up, which it should be, we're going to head over to remove the following roles from the user when muted and give them back when the mute ends. So in this case, what we're going to do is any roles outside of suspension and of course the moderator roles, unless you absolutely need to, those should all be checked. So let's say you have general access, but let's say you also have roles such as maybe there's one to determine gender, maybe there's one to determine nationality and stuff like that. Any of those roles should be checked, so that way the bot removes all of them, because sometimes with some of those roles, sometimes we may not have organized it to where we actually shut off all of the functions. And there may be sometimes not, to where those roles may override what's going on in the channel. So for the sake of peace of mind, it's best to just set the bot to just remove all of those roles accordingly. So with all that taken care of, we're going to head over to Auto Moderator version 2. And with a clean slate here, we're going to create a new rule set, and this is going to be called AntiRaiding. And it comes already enabled, but we need to set some parameters, obviously. So one of the parameters that we're going to set up here is rule set scoped conditions. So in this case, this is what's it going to take to actually trigger this in many cases. What are the conditions of involving the members? So with this, what we're going to do is we want to set up any roles that we need to ignore. Anyone with these roles, it will be ignored. So in one, it may be the admin and the moderator. That'll be for you to decide. Also, another one would be to most likely ignore the bots. So if it recognizes that there are bots there, then they can do that. You can also put any bot roles there just for good measure. You can also do some other things, such as if there's new messages, if there are certain categories you want to ignore. One thing in particular for this that I've done on some other servers is I've put the server member duration in this case. And if you want to know what any of these functions are, these values represent, you can scroll your cursor over to this question mark, and it'll show, like in this case, for ignoring roles, it'll ignore users with at least one of the roles from the rule. So any roles in this list, it'll ignore. Same thing with bots, ignore all bots. And then for server member duration, that's under a certain period of time. It'll say require members to have been on the server for less than an X amount of minutes. So for this example, we're just going to do 60 minutes, which is an hour. But ultimately, we would want that to be a lot longer. Because in my experience, some raiders, they actually wait a little bit, and then they may actually pounce. So figure out a number here that has a specific number of days, if you will, for that to consider. All right, so that's your basic rule structure. This is going to scope out to basically all of the other rules that are going to be in here. So now that we can create a specific rule within this rule set. So with this one, I'm going to name this raid spamming, because in my experience with raiders, they tend to jump in with a multiple number of individuals, but sometimes it could be just one person, but they will usually spam. And in the last incident to where that happened, there was only one individual, and they spammed the server with a bunch of text content that was racially slurring and just utterly offensive. But the bot literally upon seeing that and check the rules of in this rule set, locked that person out, and they actually made another account and tried to keep coming into the server to keep doing it, but they ended up keep getting locked out every time. We eventually reported that individual to the Discord safety team, and we encouraged our members to do the same thing if they were getting DMs from that individual. We did lock the server down eventually, and we adjusted some things in that regard, but ultimately the bot did a good job at containing what this person who was raiding could be able to do. Because if those rule sets weren't there, they probably would have been spamming for a good while before we stepped in. So having this 24-hour monitoring is a good way to try to limit that. All right, so for some triggers, the first one we're going to do is message mentions. So this is for triggers when a message includes more than a number of unique mentions. And we've had some cases like this before where folks just do just a surplus number of mentions. So figure out a number of those that are best for your server. You know, do your homework on your server. Look at the activity of how many people actually mention people, or maybe put a number limit on that so they don't trigger this. But it's a good idea to also vet each trigger to see if it's valid or not. So for this example, we'll just say 10. Okay, we'll just say 10 in this regard. Another one that we can do is X user messages in Y seconds. So this one triggers when a user has more than a certain amount of messages in a certain amount of seconds in a single channel. So again, look at how many messages your users put and go from there. And this may be a case to where you have a rule set for different channels. Like for instance, if someone is sending messages in a voice chat for the channel because they don't have a mic, they may send more messages more frequently, so you may need to adjust that. So one of the ways you can do that is you can actually set in certain channels or certain categories, okay, like active in channels. So you could say that this particular rule may be for a voice text channel versus the general channel. So you can set which channels that this particular rule is active in, but the global rule still applies, such as ignoring the roles, ignoring the bots, and in this case, the server member duration below a certain period. But just know, under the conditions, you can set which channels that this actually goes into. For this example, let's just say that this goes into the general channel, okay? So we can say that. Now going back to our triggers, another one that may be used is a X number of attachments, let's say, okay? Like user attachments, especially in the case where this needs to be kind of more vetted than anything else. But usually when raiders come in and do stuff, they tend to do it in post very obnoxious things or even vulgar or inappropriate content. And they tend to want to try to flood it, in my experience. So with that, figure out a number value for that and let it go from there. And if you have to tweak it, you have to tweak it. Then one final one here for my notes that I have is consecutive messages. So consecutive identical messages, especially, this is another experience that I've seen with raiders, is they will tend to try to spam with identical messages. So having this in here actually would be beneficial. And again, figure out a number value that is best for how your server generally operates. So you have message mentions, a certain amount. You have the number of user messages in so many seconds. So if they just start spamming different things, it'll catch it. Number of attachments, it'll catch that. And also consecutive identical messages, it'll catch that. Okay, so we went over the conditions already. So set whatever conditions that you feel are necessary for this particular rule within the rule set. Just remember about the global rules as well. Okay. And then For the effects, this is what you want the bot to do upon these issues occurring. So in this case, what I usually do is I'll have it set to where it actually mutes the user. And especially if the user's first starting out and if you have a rules acknowledgement configuration set up, there's almost no excuse for this, for that type of behavior, especially if it's in your rules that says no spamming and no raiding and anything like that, even though that's already against Discord's terms of service and community guidelines anyway. But if you already have that in there and you have a rules acknowledgement, which basically says they have read, understood, and agreed to the rules, there is no excuse for the behavior. So clearly those individuals are up to no good. Plus, I wouldn't recommend having a time limit of the mute for this one, because you ultimately want to make sure that they don't get a chance to do anything else. So I would say set that for 0, which means that will be a permanent mute until you tell the bot to unmute them. Then another effect I put in there is, to which it's kind of redundant, but it basically is a custom message. And also I usually have it send a warning to the user as well. So warn the user, and then also, which ultimately it's going to give the role, to which in this case is suspension. Now you can also do something unique too, where you can actually change the nickname of the user in violation. So you could say something like suspended, or even let's say suspect, you know? So this literally establishes this user as having an issue in the server. So if you want to set a nickname, then that's understandable. This could also work too if for some reason you may use a blacklist, like there's certain words in a username that you don't allow. So at that point, the bot can actually apply an effect to where it actually removes the nickname or changes the nickname to say suspended or whatever you want to call it. So there's more things you can do with this than just this. But that's why I want to intrigue you on it, to also just expand your horizon. You know, so do your own research on that and go from there. So a custom message for this, don't really want to bother with that. But for this one, I've had some cases where I did it, some other ones on other servers before. So in this one, let me see. You've been muted due to behavior considered to be concerning. Please open a ticket to speak with the moderation staff. Let's go with this one. And then what we'll do is we'll just zero that out, so that role is permanent until we intervene and we tell the bot to take it off. Okay, so with that, we can save that, and then ultimately we can test this. So I would say ultimately do tests on a server that is not your main server, and then once you've got all of the things figured out the way you think they should be and they seem to work okay, then you implement these settings into your main server. But I always recommend doing a test server of it first. So we're going to test to make sure we have all these figured out accordingly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to my other computer, which has a test account that I use. And we're just going to go ahead and just spam. So let's go ahead and do a little spam and see if that rule kicks in. So apparently it hasn't kicked in yet. So let's take a look at our system and make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to. So my test account has been in the server for a long while. So what I'm going to do for this, just for this example, just to show, is I'm actually going to take this rule out. Okay, so this rule right here, where it's server member duration, because my test account has actually been in the server for a long while, beyond this, it's not engaging it. So therefore, I need to take this out. All right, so now that we've taken that out, we're going to head back over to our test, and we're going to hit it. But those are some things that you can troubleshoot, that you'll need to troubleshoot and know about that ahead of time. So let's try it again. Should be 4 of them. And that should trigger it. That should trigger it. And there it is. All right. So ultimately what it is it looks like it worked. So what we have here is the account has been locked out. So then at that point, the only thing they can do is see the rules, and it can only see get a ticket. So at that point, they would have to contact the moderation staff via the ticket, or obviously the only thing is the rules. So in this particular case, there is no warning message to the user. And as we can see in our log, the account has been triggered into a status of mute. Okay, so let's say that we talked to the individual and they basically made a mistake and they said they won't do it again. And let's say we need to get them unlocked. So, well, what we can do is we can actually copy their user ID. And then we can go, in this case, to the modbot commands, and we can actually type in our command to unmute. And we can even put a reason in there. So it unmutes them. And then at that point, if we go back over, we can see now that all of the access has been reinstated. Okay, now we can talk. And notice also that their nickname is still there. That's suspended. So that doesn't actually change it back. So that's one thing you'll have to consider when doing this, is just making sure you look at all of the effects and just make sure that they're working the way you want them to. So in this case, because it gave them that nickname and it kept it there, we want to make sure that we actually take that off. Or at least in my case, that's what I'm going to do. And as we can see there, we've changed it back to the Sound Otaku test account. So I do a real world example of testing through this stuff just to see. You really have to go through this and test everything just to make sure it absolutely works. But as we could see here, we were definitely able to get this to work to where when this account started spamming stuff, the bot automatically took them out of the equation. So that's pretty much it as far as the example. This is one way of getting things to work to where it helps to keep your server just from being flooded with all kinds of stuff. But again, do your own homework on this and figure out what functions that are available with the Auto Moderator version 2 that will work for you. That's always the biggest thing, is find out what is going to work for you and your server. So I hope this has been a help for you. Maybe consider checking out my other Discord moderation tips videos. And until next time, happy mixing, everyone.